Welcome everyone to this webinar hosted by Frontline Data Solutions. My name is Renlu Yu and I'm the CEO of Frontline. Our guest today is Branden Raczkowski, who's an experienced safety professional and business development manager at Safety Nights. Welcome, Branden.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so to kick off, can you tell us a bit about your professional background and what sort of manufacturing environments you've had experience in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually graduated with my degree in biology, and it's like, well, you get out of college and you try to figure out what do you want to do with your life, right? And a colleague of mine who I graduated with had gotten a job as an environmental analyst for a green energy company, and they were hiring at the time. So I applied, and actually they must have liked my background or what I brought to the table. So I ended up getting that job, and that was my first real segue into the EHS world. Luckily, I got training on the job there and spent my first 4 years in that energy company. After that, I did get a promotion to EHS manager and moved to one of a pasta manufacturer here in the States. And, spent the rest of my EHS career from an EHS manager perspective in the manufacturing side of things. And so I did that for a total of 12 years before I started working with David over at Safety Nights. So, seen a lot in the manufacturing world. And certainly, every company does things a little bit differently, but I think I've seen enough at this point to figure out what works and what doesn't. So I'm lucky to kind of have some of that insight.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that some of your background comes from food and beverage industries, I mean that has its own special challenges too, in addition to the typical things you're faced with in manufacturing in general.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, every company, EHS has to be at the forefront, right? Because nobody wants their workers injured or have an environmental spill or something catastrophic like that. But when you're dealing with food or products that are sent to the general public, I think it advocates for an extra layer of care from the EH&S side. And then you're also looking at things such as product safety and quality control and keeping injuries from impacting product that goes out to people, such as keeping bodies and people out of the products, right? And nobody wants to think about those implications, but unfortunately in the food and bev, that's a side of things that I've had to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. So the topic we're here to talk about today is primarily kind of safety incidents and the proper response to those incidents. So what's the first thing that management should do if there is some sort of incident?
Yeah, I mean, this might sound almost dreadfully obvious, but make sure that the employee is taken care of first and foremost, right? I mean, it should go without saying, right? But first order of business before we do anything really should be to get the care that employee needs, whether it's something as small as a minor cut or scrape, all the way down to something a little bit more serious or an ergonomic sprain strain. We want to make sure that they're taken care of because ultimately we're going to have a much better incident management process if we're empathetic towards our workforce.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I imagine that incidents, even if the ones that are kind of idiosyncratic, they come up at different times of year. There may be certain patterns to when they're more likely to happen than others. So, can you talk to us a bit about that? I mean, how does the ebb and flow of incidents happen in the industries that you've had experience in?
Yeah, and you know, figuring out trend lines, is I'd say it varies from industry to industry. Certainly if you're at a place for a long stretch of time, you can look at historical records to determine that by business, right? But I'd say, ultimately some trends that I did notice is that stretches of time when overtime is getting a little bit out of control, right? I've seen a lot of uptick with injuries during those times for sure. But it's, I mean, and that goes kind of with a trend line to probability, right? I mean, if you drive your car all the time, you're probably more likely to get into a car accident than somebody who works from home and never leaves their house, right? So, I mean, more labor hours, more demand on an employee is going to cause more strain and wear and tear on the body, certainly, and you know, fatigue can play a part in that too. So, changing shifts around, you know, pulling somebody out of their normal schedule can cause that. Or, you know, I think when you look at a bell curve, you see, okay, new employees get hit a little harder with people with less experience, because they don't know all the hazards. They're not as savvy to them. And then you see on the other end of the bell curve, you see, you know, people who have been doing something over a long strain of time, and you know, their bodies are starting to break down. I don't know if I answered that well enough, but you know, certainly there's a lot of different trends we can draw on when we really look at data.
No, you absolutely did. So what I'm hearing is that there's kind of almost a kind of double whammy that you get when you're in a seasonal business, where the amount of work and the number of hours kind of ebbs and flows, right? So I can imagine for industries that have sort of a peak season, you have not only the overtime that you're talking about, people, you know, needing to work more hours, and maybe they get a little bit tired or maybe a little less careful, but you also have an influx of new employees during those peak times. And as you said, you know, new employees, a little bit less training, a little bit less experience. They're a little bit more prone to accidents and injuries. So is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, that's in my experience, that's what I've seen, and you know, while I can't say that I've necessarily worked in a seasonal business, you know, for example, even in the pasta industry, there was, you know, some seasons where we saw a lot more production demand, so you could kind of see that it would trend with that. And then certainly temp labor forces, right? I mean, if you're relying on an influx of temporary labor, that's, you know, that was definitely a struggle or a challenge that I've had at a couple different manufacturers.
Gotcha. So one way to continuously improve is by doing a root cause analysis after an incident, really trying to understand what happened. So what are some common mistakes that safety leaders make when they're conducting a root cause analysis?
You know, and I haven't sat on a lot of, you know, other safety managers as they've done them. But I think earlier on in my experience, one of the things that I felt like that I didn't do well enough, you know, when you're drilling down on using some sort of tool, like such as a 5Y, for instance, right? You're looking at, okay, why did it happen? And maybe you're not looking at all the different variables, right? So you're getting down to maybe one or two root causes when there could be five, you know, and maybe you're not getting far enough, or not far enough, but not wide enough in your scope, right? So that's certainly something that I had to learn from over the years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, you know, one thing that I've noticed in the root cause analyses that I've seen is that there's a difficulty in really determining what level of cause you're really trying to go after, right? Because with anything, there's a proximate cause. You know, there's something like, oh, the employee went to an area they weren't supposed to, or they weren't, you know, using proper PPE, or, you know, they were handling machinery in an improper way or something like that. You know, there's a proximate cause of the incident, but then there are things that caused those actions, right? So why did they not use the proper PPE? Why did they, you know, operate machinery in a way they weren't supposed to? And that may come down to, you know, training or communication or signage, or, yeah, there's so many other things, and then those might be caused by, you know, kind of upper management not investing in training properly, or not setting aside time for refreshers and things like that. So yeah, it's just, I've always found it a tricky thing to really say, okay, well, this is the real cause of this, but really, it's kind of a whole chain of actions.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, and I think that all the EHS people out there, we've really made it our primary mission to build the best and most robust EH&S program that we can put together, right? But at the end of the day, we have limited resources, right? And in our resource limitations aren't defined by ourselves; they're defined by the next level up, right? So ultimately, the culture of an organization is defined by the leadership at the top, and how well are they empowering the next level down to place that emphasis and that focus on an environmental health and safety program. Because no matter what we do as EHS managers, directors, specialists, we can't build a culture if there's not buy-in from senior staff, C-suite, ownership. It's got to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a bit about corrective and preventative action plans, so CAPAs. So what does a good CAPA plan actually include?
Well, I think if we spell out the acronym, right, so corrective and preventative action, and I've seen in my experience when I've gotten into an organization, I look back through maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years of history, and I look at what they're doing to correct incidents. And I won't mention any names, but one of the organizations that I went to, after looking back through their history, certainly not deep diving into every single one, but 9 out of 10 times their corrective action was coach employee, right? I mean, and that's right. To me, I mean, that's beyond superficial. It's almost, it's straight useless, right? Coaching an employee is not a corrective or preventative action, right? We didn't correct any conditions. We didn't change any policies or procedures. We didn't implement any engineering controls. And we certainly didn't correct or prevent anything by doing something like that. So I think, following your hierarchy of controls, that's a huge key piece right there. And then I guess proper review is another element that I see is probably one of the bigger missteps, right? So you put in some sort of corrective action or preventative action. How are you refreshing it or checking it over time to make sure that it was actually effective, right? So you need some sort of effectiveness review. So I think those are probably two of the biggest missteps that I've seen, in rolling out corrective and preventative actions. But certainly, you got to start with finding out the root cause, doing some sort of robust root cause analysis, and then progressing through the rest of the process.
Yeah, something you said about closing the loop and really evaluating whether the actions you took are actually effective. I think that's super important, because it's very tempting to kind of, hand wave and, feel like you've done something by doing that. But at the end of the day, you've only done something if it had an effect, right? If it actually is changing the way things are done and the risks that people are exposed to. So yeah, I think it's super important to actually look back and see, okay, well, did we accomplish what we were intending to accomplish?
Yeah, and when I did see some of those examples, like I mentioned, where the corrective action was coach employee, initially I wanted to blame the person who was in my spot before me and say, well, they just didn't know what they were doing. And then you come to realize, maybe it wasn't that person at all. Maybe it was the organization from the top down handcuffing their ability to implement and roll out effective CAPAs, right? I mean, nobody wants to just leave it at coach employee, I don't think. That's not the way most of us are running our programs. But if you don't have a budget, to change things, if you don't have the senior management support to roll new programs out, maybe you're reduced to an ineffectiveness at your role, and all you can do is coach an employee, which is terrible, and not it's certainly nothing that I've settled for over the years. But I could see how somebody would be put into that position if the buy-in of the company or the company culture is that poor.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never seen a Kappa that had, changed the attitudes of senior management, as one of the steps. I mean, maybe it should be, but it's hard to go.
Yeah, I think that person would be too afraid they'd get fired to put something in there like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned a few minutes ago about kind of the difficulties of trying to put together a robust EHS program when maybe there's not that buy-in from upper management, maybe the culture of safety is not as developed in the organization. So, what can a safety professional do in those kind of situations, right? When maybe they don't have the budget they need, maybe they don't have quite the support they're looking for from senior management. Is there anything they can do to kind of help improve the situation?
Um, I would say yes and no, right? So the one thing that you can't open is a closed mind. But I think sometimes we in the EHS department speak a different language than the people on operations, right? So our care and our goal is oriented towards injury reduction or elimination, right? Or prevention, when their goals maybe are in running a business, right? So they're trying to make the business more profitable, make sure that there's good cash flow coming in. And maybe they don't understand the return on investment of having a good safety program or having a good environmental program. So I think we need to look at that kind of a data solution, right? Of how do we justify putting together this program, and how does it impact the business, right? We need to be looking at things like, how much money are we saving by improving our ergonomic program through whether it's workers' comp reduction, how many claims we're doing, dollars spent on administrative costs due to a reduction in injuries, right? Because when we're doing incident response or investigation, it's not just the safety person who's involved in that. It's the managers, it's the supervisors. Their time is expensive, right? We need to account for that and let them know what this amount of capital is that they're spending on a monthly, annual basis, however frequency. And certainly there's a lot of different factors we can look at from a cost perspective. But I think another one is, how does this affect our on-time deliveries? How does this affect our, company morale, right? I mean, there's just a lot of things that we can look at as how EH&S improves a business. So I think that would be the thing that I would focus on, or the advice that I would give to an EHS person when you don't feel like you're being heard, and try to approach it from that angle, from the things that the people above you are really valuing.
I think that's a really important point worth reiterating. It's just the fact that there is, like you said, a kind of speaking two different languages, right? It's just one, one from the safety side where you feel like, okay, well, yeah, what I'm suggesting is a no-brainer, and it's really mandatory that we do X, Y, Z. But then from the operations, from the finance side, say, oh, okay, well, this makes our bottom line look worse, so we're not going to do that, right? So it's very easy to kind of have that mindset when you're not seeing kind of the dollars and cents kind of return from something. And something like safety incidents or related EHS issues like change management, it's oftentimes hard to put a hard dollar value on something. So, for example, this doesn't come up super often in like food and beverage, but like management of change, comes up a lot in the chemical industry, oil and gas, and so forth. And that sometimes that can be a hard sell to upper management. It's like they say, oh well, we're doing change management right now, with spreadsheets and with email or whatever. And that costs $0, right? And so why invest in anything that helps us do that? Well, if you when you start adding up all the man hours that go into it and lost productivity from making these changes more slowly and having a longer shutdown period, just there's so many different things you could factor in, and then suddenly we're talking dollars and cents here, and folks actually start listening.
Oh, for sure. I would say one more thing too. So there's a cost in turnover too, right? I mean, when your job is inefficient and you're pulling your hair out every day, there's the propensity for EH&S people to look somewhere else, right? And every time an EHS manager changes positions, there's a huge loss of, I'll say, tribal knowledge, of experience that happens every time there's that turnover, right? So, I mean, it's going to take even a good seasoned EHS manager at least 6 months to a year to get the program back in alignment and figure everything out, right? I guess I'd say based on the average size of the organization that I worked for, that's what I've experienced, right? So if your workload is unbearable, right? I mean, and the market is the way that it is, you might have a better chance of looking somewhere else, making more money, not having to deal with as many headaches if they've got a good system in place. And when I say a good system in place, is something that's a little bit better than a spreadsheet, that can be very labor intensive. And anytime that you've got your EH&S manager sitting behind a desk doing clerical work, it's just not good value, right? Their boots should be on the ground. They should be out there observing, coaching, offering advice, looking at processes, seeing if they can look at some improvement, look at some risk that maybe got overlooked. They're more valuable out on the floor. So get them out from behind their desk, make their jobs more efficient, and you're going to have a better program there too.
Yeah, well said. All right, well, I think it's a great place for us to leave off here before we get into Q&A. So I guess, Branden, tell the folks listening what's the best way to contact you for for advice, for information, or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm always open to connecting here on LinkedIn. But I would say too, the Safety Nights community is growing. We're up to about 3,300 safety professionals, most of which are here in the United States. It's a great community. I think the thing is with LinkedIn, there's kind of some superficial posts going on, or not posts, but we don't really get into the heart of the discussion like maybe we would on a platform like Safety Nights that's a little bit more specialized. And certainly I'm open to one-on-one conversations, or that's great too. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I mean, our employees are all on there, and definitely, we encourage everybody we talk to that's in the industry to check it out. It's a great resource. So, okay, great. Well, now we can hand it off to Q&A.